In the heart of Africa, where the red soil kissed the sky at sunset and the drums of the earth beat in harmony with the hearts of its people, there lay two villages separated by a narrow river. The water shimmered like glass under the moonlight, carrying with it the whispers of ancestors and the cries of generations past. But the river was not just a boundary of nature, it had become a boundary of hatred. For decades, the two villages had lived in enmity. No one remembered how it began. Some said it was over stolen cattle, others claimed it was a dispute about land, and a few believed it was born from the jealousies of long-forgotten leaders. Yet the truth no longer mattered. What mattered was the hatred, passed like a poisoned inheritance from one generation to the next. Children grew up learning not to cross the river. Mothers told stories of betrayal, fathers spoke of blood debts, and warriors sharpened their spears not for the hunt but for the day when battle would return. Every festival on one side was seen as mockery by the other. Every marriage, every birth, every success was interpreted as arrogance. What could have been two villages thriving as one became two camps preparing for endless conflict. Among them lived an elder named Kofi. He was a man whose skin bore the wrinkles of many years under the African sun, and whose eyes carried the weight of stories too heavy to tell. Kofi had once been a warrior, strong and fierce, but as age wrapped around his shoulders like a heavy cloak, he became a man of peace. He had seen enough blood, enough screams, enough graves dug for sons who had never seen their children grow. He lived simply, sitting under the great baobab tree each morning, speaking with children, teaching them proverbs, telling them that the earth does not belong to those who fight but to those who nurture. But few listened deeply. They respected him, yes. They admired his wisdom, yes. Yet when the drums of war began to echo, wisdom was drowned out by anger. One season, a dispute erupted again. A cow from one village wandered across the river, grazing on crops belonging to the other. It was a small matter, something that could have been resolved with dialogue, but hatred is never small. One spark was enough to set dry grass ablaze. Angry voices rose, weapons were polished, war songs were sung again. The air thickened with tension, and the river that once carried whispers now carried the sound of marching feet. Kofi saw it. He saw the youths, full of rage, gripping their spears and bows. He saw the elders, too proud to call for calm. He saw mothers crying as they prepared food for their sons, knowing they might not return. And he saw the children, too young to fight, but old enough to learn what hate looks like. His heart broke, for he knew that if this battle began, it would not stop. Blood would spill, and the soil would drink it greedily, only to demand more tomorrow. That night, while the moon hovered like a watchful guardian, Kofi walked alone to the river. He looked at its gentle flow and whispered to it, asking if there was another way. His reflection trembled on the water's surface, old and weary. He thought of his ancestors, who had once united these villages before pride tore them apart. He thought of his own youth, when he had taken lives across this same river, believing it was duty. The guilt still sat heavy on him. And in that moment, he knew, if the cycle was to be broken, it needed a sacrifice greater than vengeance. The next morning, when both villages gathered at the riverbank armed and ready, Kofi stepped between them. His staff tapped against the stones as he walked slowly, deliberately, his frail frame dwarfed by the angry crowds. Murmurs rose. Some asked what the old man was doing. Others shouted for him to move aside. But Kofi did not waver. He raised his hand, and with a voice that carried the weight of years, he began to speak. "My sons, my daughters, my people," he said, his eyes sweeping across both sides. "Look at me. I am an old man, and I have walked longer on this earth than many of you. I have seen the price of hatred. I have buried friends, brothers, and even my own kin because of this river of blood we call honor. And I tell you now, there is no honor in slaughter. There is only grief." The villagers shifted uneasily, but anger is a stubborn fire. Shouts came from the crowd, accusing the other side of arrogance, theft, betrayal. Spears rattled. A bow was raised. And Kofi knew words alone would not quench this fire. So he did what no one expected. He stepped forward, into the very middle of the narrow river. The water lapped around his legs as he lifted his staff high. If blood must flow today, he declared, let it be mine. If hatred demands a life, let it take the last of my years. I will not let my children and grandchildren inherit this curse. For a moment, silence blanketed the riverbanks. The only sound was the rushing of water and the call of distant birds. Then someone shouted that the old man should move before he was struck. Another warned him that he would die if the fight began. But Kofi only closed his eyes. His voice trembled, yet it was resolute, strike me down first, and let my death be the last this river sees. The warriors hesitated. No one wanted to raise a hand against Kofi, the elder who had blessed their children, healed their wounds with herbs, told them stories by firelight. His frail body standing unarmed before their weapons was like a mirror reflecting their shame. The rage in their hearts clashed with the respect they bore him. The river seemed to widen, as though the water itself refused to let blood cross it. Moments stretched into eternity. Then one of the youngest warriors dropped his spear. The clatter echoed like thunder. Another followed. Soon, one by one, weapons fell into the dust. The war songs faded, replaced by silence, then by sobs. Mothers rushed forward, clutching their sons. Children clung to their fathers. And the river, for the first time in years, carried not cries of anger but the murmurs of relief. Kofi stood trembling, tears streaming down his face. He knew he had given everything, not with the swing of a blade but with the surrender of his life. His legs weakened, and before the crowd could reach him, he fell into the shallow water. They rushed to him, lifting his frail body, but his eyes were already closing. With his last breath, he whispered, remember, peace is the inheritance worth leaving. The villages mourned together. For the first time in generations, they dug a grave not for enemies but for a man who belonged to both sides. They buried Kofi beneath the great baobab tree, the tree where he had taught children, the tree that had listened to his wisdom. And there, on that day, something remarkable happened. Elders who had once sworn never to speak to one another embraced. Warriors who had sharpened their spears hugged like brothers. Children from both sides played together, no longer told to fear one another. The river was no longer a boundary of hatred but a place of memory. People came to it not to prepare for war, but to wash their hands, to remember the elder who had stood in its waters and broken the chain of blood. Festivals were held on both banks, marriages crossed the river freely, and the songs that once carried threats now carried laughter. Generations passed, and the story of Kofi became legend. Children grew up hearing how one man had refused to let them inherit hatred. His sacrifice was retold by firesides, in schools, during ceremonies, and each time, the lesson was clear: peace requires courage greater than war. Unity demands more strength than division. And love, once chosen, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so the villages thrived together, living as one people, bound not by the hatred of the past but by the sacrifice of an elder who had given his life so that they might live differently. His grave under the baobab tree became a sacred place, a reminder that one life, lived with courage, can change the destiny of many.